Ladies and gentlemen, in a world shifting beneath our feet, there comes a time when a nation must listen to the voice of its soul. Today, we gather not just to speak of policies or partnerships, but to witness the awakening of India's deeper destiny. Like a river that charts its own course, India is rising, bold, unwavering, and divinely guided. This is more than a trade decision. It is a spiritual journey towards self-reliance, dignity, and truth. Stay with us, for what you'll hear today is not just a speech. It is a call to consciousness and a vision for tomorrow. India's decision to pivot away from its traditional trade relationship with the United States marks a significant shift in its global economic and diplomatic posture. This move indicates a broader strategic realignment, where India is choosing to deepen economic ties with neighboring and regional powers like Russia and China. The change is not abrupt, but the result of years of shifting dynamics in international politics, where India has been reassessing its position within a multipolar world. For decades, India maintained a balanced approach in its foreign trade, engaging actively with Western economies while also cooperating with regional powers. However, emerging geopolitical realities, such as increasing protectionism from the West and unpredictable sanctions regimes, have prompted India to reconsider the long-term stability of its economic partnerships. In contrast, Russia and China offer alternatives that are not only geographically closer, but also come with strategic advantages such as energy security, infrastructure development, and access to large consumer markets. Additionally, India's active participation in organizations like BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and various Eurasian trade forums has paved the way for enhanced cooperation beyond bilateral channels. These platforms are being used to foster trade, reduce tariff barriers, and establish new logistics corridors that bypass traditional Western-controlled routes. India's engagement with Russia includes energy, military hardware, and technology exchange, while with China, trade continues in electronics, industrial machinery, and intermediate goods. Despite differences, particularly with China over border issues, economic pragmatism is driving decisions. This strategic realignment does not imply total disengagement from the West, but reflects India's intent to rebalance its foreign trade priorities in favor of relationships that are less volatile, more multipolar, and more aligned with its long-term economic and security objectives. It is an assertion of sovereignty in global trade policy through diversification and regional cooperation. The relationship between India and the United States has experienced growing friction in recent years, particularly in the areas of trade, defense policy, and diplomatic engagement. While both countries have historically cooperated on multiple fronts, including counterterrorism, defense technology, and democratic values, recent developments have led to increasing distrust and policy divergence. One major source of tension has been the imposition of unilateral trade restrictions and tariffs by the United States on Indian goods. These actions, often justified under domestic economic policies, have been viewed by India as unfair and detrimental to its export sectors. Additionally, the U.S. withdrawal of India's preferential trade status under the Generalized System of Preferences (GSP) removed tariff benefits from thousands of Indian products, hurting small and medium enterprises. Diplomatic disagreements have also emerged on issues such as India's purchase of defense systems from Russia, particularly the S-400 missile defense system. The United States has threatened sanctions under its domestic laws, despite India's strategic need to maintain a diversified defense portfolio. Such moves have been seen in India as undermining its sovereignty and pressuring it to align with Western strategic interests at the cost of its own. Furthermore, the U.S. has been increasingly vocal on India's internal policy decisions, including matters of domestic security, human rights, and religious freedom. These criticisms have been interpreted by many in India as intrusive and politically motivated, leading to public and political backlash. At the same time, the United States' growing military and diplomatic engagement with Pakistan and certain moves in the Indo-Pacific region have created suspicions about its long-term reliability as a strategic partner. These overlapping concerns have contributed to a climate of mistrust, pushing India to reassess the stability and mutual respect within its relationship with the United States, particularly in the domain of economic cooperation. India's long-standing partnership with Russia has been a cornerstone of its energy security and defense preparedness. This relationship dates back to the Cold War era and has continued to thrive despite changing global alignments. In the current geopolitical climate, as India distances itself from over-reliance on Western powers, the Russia-India axis is gaining renewed significance, particularly in the fields of energy supply and military cooperation. Russia is one of India's most dependable energy partners, supplying a significant portion of its crude oil, coal, and natural gas. In recent years, India has taken advantage of discounted Russian oil, especially during periods of Western sanctions against Moscow. This arrangement has allowed India to secure energy at more favorable prices, supporting its growing domestic demand while maintaining its strategic autonomy. Long-term contracts and investments in Russian energy infrastructure, such as the Sakhalin oil fields, have further deepened this cooperation. On the defense front, Russia remains one of India's primary sources of advanced weaponry and military technology. The Indian armed forces operate a substantial inventory of Russian-origin systems, ranging from tanks and fighter jets to submarines and air defense systems. Recent acquisitions like the S-400 missile defense system underscore the strategic depth of this defense partnership. Unlike some Western nations, Russia has consistently transferred technology and supported joint development projects, including the BrahMos missile program and potential future combat aircraft collaborations. India also values Russia's willingness to engage in long-term, stable agreements that are not subject to abrupt political pressures. Russian defense deals often include provisions for local manufacturing and technology sharing, aligning well with India's push for indigenization under its self-reliance initiatives. The shared strategic interests, mutual respect, and historical familiarity make Russia a key partner in India's efforts to strengthen its economic and defense capabilities. Despite ongoing geopolitical tensions and a complex history, India continues to recognize the significant economic opportunities that trade with China presents. China remains one of India's largest trading partners, with trade volumes crossing hundreds of billions of dollars annually. While political relations have experienced strain, particularly following border skirmishes and strategic competition, economic pragmatism has led both nations to keep trade channels largely open. China is a global manufacturing hub and plays a vital role in supplying India with intermediate goods, electronic components, medical equipment, and industrial machinery. Indian industries, particularly in pharmaceuticals, electronics, and textiles, rely heavily on Chinese imports for raw materials and essential components. Disrupting these supply chains without viable alternatives could affect Indian production and exports across various sectors. Recognizing this interdependence, India has opted for a calculated engagement strategy that separates economic cooperation from political disputes. At the same time, India sees opportunities to address its trade imbalance by increasing exports in sectors like pharmaceuticals, agricultural products, and IT services. Several Indian companies are also exploring ways to access Chinese consumer markets, particularly in areas where India has a competitive edge. Trade negotiations have begun focusing on non-tariff barriers and more predictable policies to enhance mutual economic benefits. China's Belt and Road Initiative has not found official support in India, but both nations remain engaged through regional platforms like BRICS and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership RCEP, where trade cooperation continues to be discussed. Infrastructure, connectivity, and digital trade are areas of growing interest for both sides, especially as global supply chains are being recalibrated. By maintaining a functional trade relationship with China, India is positioning itself to take advantage of regional economic integration, while also working to strengthen its own industrial capacity through policy reforms and strategic investments. India's increasing engagement with multilateral organizations like BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, reflects its broader strategy to diversify global partnerships and reduce dependency on Western-centric institutions. These frameworks provide India with platforms to pursue economic and strategic objectives through cooperation with emerging powers across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Within BRICS, India has actively participated in initiatives aimed at reforming global financial institutions, promoting sustainable development, and enhancing South-South cooperation. The establishment of the new development bank NDB under BRICS is a significant milestone, offering member countries access to funding for infrastructure and development projects without the conditionalities often attached to Western financial aid. For India, this presents opportunities to finance major national projects while strengthening its economic ties with partner countries. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which includes Russia, China, and several Central Asian nations, serves as a regional platform to address issues such as security, energy cooperation, trade connectivity, and counterterrorism. India's full membership in the SCO has allowed it to engage more deeply with Eurasian economies and to play a role in shaping the regional security architecture. Through SCO, India has also gained a direct channel for dialogue with Central Asia and Afghanistan, regions that are strategically important for energy access and regional stability. Both BRICS and SCO promote the idea of a multipolar world, where emerging economies have greater influence in global governance. These forums allow India to collaborate on alternative financial systems, such as using local currencies for trade, and to explore infrastructure projects like the International North-South Transport Corridor INST. By deepening its participation in these groups, India is working toward greater economic independence, regional influence, and a balanced global trade strategy that is less reliant on Western alliances. India is increasingly exploring ways to reduce its reliance on the US dollar for international trade, driven by concerns over economic sovereignty, vulnerability to sanctions, and the desire for a more balanced global financial system. This strategic shift aligns with a broader global trend where several emerging economies are seeking alternatives to the dollar-dominated trade structure. The dominance of the US dollar in global trade has long given Washington significant leverage in international affairs, including the ability to impose unilateral sanctions and control financial flows. For India, which has faced pressure over its trade with countries like Russia and Iran, this dependence has exposed vulnerabilities that threaten its autonomy in foreign and economic policy decisions. By reducing dollar usage, India aims to insulate itself from potential financial disruptions and political pressures stemming from US economic policies. One major step in this direction has been India's engagement in bilateral trade agreements that allow for transactions in local currencies. For instance, India and Russia have initiated mechanisms to settle payments in rupees and rubles for defense and energy deals. Similar currency arrangements are being explored with countries like the United Arab Emirates, Iran, and even China, enabling smoother trade flows without involving the US financial system. India is also examining the potential of digital currencies and blockchain-based systems to facilitate cross-border payments. The Reserve Bank of India is actively researching and piloting a central bank digital currency (CBDC), which could, in the future, play a role in reducing transaction costs and minimizing reliance on the dollar. Furthermore, India's participation in BRICS discussions about creating a shared settlement currency or using national currencies in trade reinforces this commitment. Through these efforts, India is not only aiming to protect its economic interests, but also contributing to the evolution of a more multipolar and diversified global financial system. India's shift in global trade partnerships is closely linked to its broader goal of economic self-reliance, commonly referred to as Atmanirbhar Bharat. This policy initiative emphasizes indigenization, the process of developing and producing goods, technologies, and services within the country, rather than relying heavily on foreign imports. The push for indigenization has gained momentum in sectors such as defense, electronics, energy, manufacturing, and agriculture, and is central to India's redefined global trade strategy. One of the primary motivations behind indigenization is to reduce vulnerability to external supply chain disruptions. The COVID-19 pandemic and rising geopolitical tensions exposed India's dependence on imports for critical goods, particularly in pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and defense equipment. By encouraging domestic manufacturing and innovation, India seeks to build resilience and ensure uninterrupted access to essential resources and technologies. In the defense sector, India has taken substantial steps toward replacing imported military hardware with indigenous alternatives. Public sector undertakings and private companies are being incentivized to design and manufacture equipment ranging from rifles and drones to missiles and fighter jets. Policies mandating local content in defense procurement and the establishment of defense corridors are part of this strategy. The government has also introduced production-linked incentive PLI schemes across various industries, offering financial support to firms that invest in domestic manufacturing. These efforts aim to attract both domestic and foreign companies to set up operations in India, boosting job creation, exports, and technological capability. Indigenization is also deeply tied to trade policy, as India reduces dependency on countries like the United States for high-value imports. It is redirecting focus towards strategic partnerships that offer knowledge transfer, joint ventures, and collaborative innovation. This model supports long-term national interests by balancing international cooperation with domestic capacity, building, and economic empowerment. The global impact of Western sanctions, particularly those led by the United States and the European Union, has played a significant role in shaping India's evolving trade strategy. These sanctions, often imposed unilaterally and without United Nations backing, have affected key global players such as Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, all of which hold economic and strategic relevance for India. The unintended consequence of these sanctions has been the disruption of trade channels, financial transactions, and energy supplies for countries engaged with the targeted nations. India, which imports a substantial portion of its energy from abroad, has faced direct and indirect pressure when continuing trade with sanctioned countries. For example, the U.S. sanctions on Russia following the Ukraine conflict have complicated India's long-standing defense and energy agreements with Moscow. Despite these challenges, India has maintained its engagement with Russia, often using rupee-ruble payment mechanisms and local currency swaps to bypass Western financial systems. These experiences have prompted India to reevaluate the risks of depending too heavily on partners vulnerable to or responsible for sanctions. They have also led to broader concerns about the stability and fairness of a global trade order dominated by a few powerful nations. As a result, India is seeking to diversify its trade portfolio and reduce exposure to regions heavily influenced by Western political and financial institutions. The fallout from sanctions has also accelerated India's interest in building alternative institutions and supply chains. Engagement with forums like BRICS, SCO, and bilateral agreements with Russia and China is part of this effort. These platforms allow for economic cooperation that is less likely to be interrupted by Western political agendas. By adjusting its trade approach in response to the instability caused by sanctions, India aims to preserve strategic autonomy while safeguarding its economic interests in a rapidly changing global environment. India's shift in trade partnerships toward Russia and China is not solely driven by economic factors, but also by strategic goals related to regional stability and security. As a major power in South Asia and the broader Indo-Pacific, India has long recognized that economic cooperation plays a critical role in maintaining peace, managing borders, and fostering long-term regional development. By deepening trade and infrastructure links with neighboring and regional powers, India is working to create a more balanced and interconnected region. This is especially important in the face of growing geopolitical tensions, rising military spending, and unresolved border disputes. Stable economic ties with countries like China and Russia serve as a counterweight to these tensions and offer channels for dialogue even when political relations are strained. India's participation in large-scale infrastructure projects like the International North-South Transport Corridor (INST) reflects its ambition to create secure and efficient trade routes that bypass choke points and politically sensitive areas. This initiative, involving countries like Russia, Iran, and Central Asian republics, aims to connect India with Europe and Eurasia through a network of rail, road, and sea routes. Such projects are not just about trade, but about establishing influence, trust, and interdependence that contribute to long-term regional harmony. Additionally, India views economic partnerships with Russia and China as tools to reduce third-party influence in regional affairs. As global rivalries intensify, India seeks to maintain its strategic autonomy by strengthening regional relationships that are less susceptible to Western interference. This approach also supports joint efforts in counterterrorism, energy security, environmental resilience, and disaster response. Economic cooperation, when paired with diplomatic engagement, enhances India's ability to mediate conflicts, balance regional power dynamics, and promote development across borders, contributing to a more stable and self-reliant regional order. India's recent trade decisions reflect a broader shift toward a bold, independent foreign policy that prioritizes national interests over alignment with any single global power. This approach is grounded in a belief that India, as a rising global player, must act on its own terms in matters of economic, strategic, and diplomatic engagement. The decision to reduce trade dependence on the United States while strengthening ties with Russia and China underscores this assertive stance. Rather than following the traditional path of aligning with Western powers for economic security and diplomatic leverage, India is increasingly pursuing a multipolar strategy. This means building balanced relationships with a wide range of countries, each based on mutual benefit and non-interference in domestic affairs. By doing so, India is crafting a foreign policy that reflects its civilizational values, strategic autonomy, and evolving global role. This policy is particularly visible in India's refusal to bow to external pressure. Whether related to energy imports from sanctioned nations, defense purchases, or domestic policymaking, India has maintained trade with Russia despite global sanctions, engaged economically with China despite border tensions, and declined to take sides in major geopolitical rivalries. This approach signals a commitment to neutrality where necessary, but also the confidence to engage assertively when its core interests are at stake. India's participation in multiple regional and global forums, from BRICS and SCO to the G20 and the Quad, highlights its ability to engage across ideological and strategic divides. This multidimensional engagement allows India to hedge against global uncertainty, create new economic opportunities, and safeguard its sovereignty. Through this emerging foreign policy direction, India is not just responding to global shifts, it is helping shape them, using trade and diplomacy as tools for strategic balance and long-term national advancement. India's decision to pivot away from traditional trade alignments and strengthen ties with Russia and China marks a decisive step toward economic independence and strategic autonomy. Through multipolar engagement, regional cooperation, and bold policy shifts, India is reshaping its role in the global order on its own terms. This is not a retreat, but a realignment, grounded in pragmatism, resilience, and national interest. Thank you and good luck message. Thank you all for your attention and thoughtful presence today. May this moment inspire us to think boldly, act wisely, and always put our nation's future first. Good luck, and Jai Hind.